Greetings. This is the second part of our legal matters lecture. Okay, we'll actually have three parts of it. Our first part was on the Bill of Rights and the four different amendments that really deal with the legal system and things that deal with evidence collection and forensic science. Now we're actually going to talk about the evidence itself, and so I'm going to try to get through this video here pretty quick. How evidence is received is very, very important when we're talking about being a crime scene professional and how that evidence is handled, how it's perceived, how it's reported in court, because of our view in the Constitution of people being innocent until proven guilty, okay, and that you have certain rights as you are accused. And so it is crucial, as it says here, that those in law enforcement understand that types of evidence, how it's perceived in court, and how to testify to its significance and the importance of proper evidence collection and handling, that you have a grasp of all of those topics, because if not, you may send a perception out that you know more or less than you do, and can cause a trial to go a different way. So we're going to talk about the probative value of evidence. That's a term that you would need to know for a quiz. Hint, hint. It has a higher probative value if the evidence can prove something in court. Okay, like we're talking blood sampling, we're talking DNA, we're talking that if it can really prove that something happened. The lower the probability of an event, the higher the probative value. Okay, we'll look at here just a little bit about blood sampling and how different factors in a blood sample of how that blood is actually put together with its type and different proteins and things like that can actually have a high probative value, because it means that there is more of a chance that it belonged to a certain individual. Probability obviously is the frequency of the occurrence of an event. I mean, we know what a probability basically is. You flip a coin 100 times and it's going to go heads roughly 50 times, it's going to go tails roughly 50 times, so you have a 5 out of 10 shot of it being heads or tails. So the product rule is how to calculate. We probably won't do a lot of these calculations, at least early on in the year right now, where you can calculate the overall frequency. Like this would be an example from O.J. Simpson's case, which we'll actually be studying in class here within the next week, talking about different factors in his blood and the frequency of it happening in the population. Well, you can take those and you can multiply them, and it comes out to that just with those blood factors alone, that there's a 1 out of 200 shot, or 1 out of 200 people would have that particular blood combination. Okay, direct evidence and indirect evidence. This is an interesting thing to me. Direct evidence is evidence that establishes a fact. Direct would be like eyewitness testimony, a confession, okay, physical evidence found on a person, okay, a murder weapon, if you will, okay, on a person, or audio-visual recording of an act of crime. That's what we would consider direct evidence, where if you said, I did it, I robbed this person, I killed this person, that confession is direct evidence, okay? It's very subjective. There's also indirect evidence. Indirect evidence is more circumstantial, and that's what we deal a lot with in forensic science, is circumstantial evidence, because it deals with making the observation as the forensic scientist and then others taking the inference from that, if you remember the difference between inference and observation. So it's not always complete proof, but it builds the circumstance, okay, and it's evidence towards that circumstance, which may prove something one way or the other. And so physical evidence is nearly always circumstantial, and so most of anything that's going to be analyzed in a lab ultimately is circumstantial evidence. Like example, if you have fingerprints at a crime scene, if you find hair samples at a crime scene, it can be consistent with that of the perpetrator or the suspect, and so, but it's still up to the judge and the jury to really make that claim that they are the one that committed the crime. Okay. So when we talk of the influence of direct and indirect evidence, we said already that circumstantial evidence is more objective, while direct evidence is more subjective. Okay. Objective basically means that there's not bias that's put into it. Okay, that we're looking at it from hopefully an unbiased perspective. In general, direct evidence is not considered to be as reliable as circumstantial evidence, okay, which is strange. Okay, if a person says, I murdered someone, okay, well, you still need to, in a lot of cases, have to convince people. There has to be, if I say, I murdered someone, however, the murder took place in California while I was in Florida, Okay, it doesn't matter that I confessed to the crime. There needs to be evidence that I actually was able to commit that crime. Because of eyewitness deficiency, okay, flawed questioning techniques. Okay, if you beat someone to a bloody pulp and make them tell you that they committed a crime, it's not exactly, you know, a permissible way and a solid form of evidence. In the age of the eyewitness and the passing of time, we looked at that with our Innocence Project case. Okay, it says that as an eyewitness gets further away from something happening, they actually get more sure of what they saw. Okay, even though that it's not as fresh in their mind. And so, direct evidence, while crucial, it's not. It's up for interpretation a lot of times, and so, or maybe it could be flawed in different ways. Now, the impact of direct and indirect evidence. Basically, you go either way. Some research says that direct evidence has more impact on the jury, which, I mean, you would think so. If someone says, "I saw this person, you know, commit this crime," the jury is going to say, "Okay, well, obviously this person saw this. They're saying this under oath." However, physical evidence, okay, if you have DNA evidence that links a person to a crime or links a person to a rape or links a person to being in a place where there was a robbery that took place, then that could be more valid. So basically what you need is neither one is more compelling. You just have to have good, strong evidence. If you have 10 eyewitnesses that all say they saw the same thing, that's going to be stronger than one person who saw something in the, you know, in the dark. Versus, you know, the same thing if it's like if I have a small DNA sample that's saying that this could be the case, but then over here I have, yeah, there's actually this person's DNA and fingerprints are all over a particular room, then that is going to be more compelling. So, the role of the forensic scientist, okay, this is where we're concerned. You need to always be aware of how persuasive eyewitness testimony can be. Okay, you cannot let that interfere with you. Okay, if you know that there is a witness that says, "I know that suspect A did this crime, I saw them do it," when you are testing the evidence, when you are doing blood analysis, when you're doing hair analysis, you need to make sure that you're not letting that impact your judgment as you're doing this analysis. Okay, so you don't let that interfere when you are analyzing it or when you're developing a hypothesis. It doesn't matter what anyone saw. It only matters as a forensic scientist what you are testing in the lab. You have to stick to the scientific method there. And so the direct evidence of a police officer's testimony concerning the source of evidence, documentation, and chain of custody, those things all come together and they strengthen and they make the probative value of physical evidence, make it more valuable or not. Okay. All right, individual and class evidence. You're going to need to know these two things. We're actually going to do an activity in class where we're going to try to figure these two out. You're going to need to do some research on this as well. Individual evidence. Evidence that can be linked to a unique, specific source with a very high degree of probability. Okay, that is individual evidence. You just think of it that it can be linked to an individual. That would be fingerprint matching up. Okay. You know, like when you fire a gun, it has a certain pattern, okay, or when, on the bullet. And so if you fired 2 bullets from that gun and you were able to match those up, that would be individual evidence. If things are able to fit together well, okay, like a broken window, you know, or something along those lines, or torn paper, that would be individual evidence where it lines up to a specific person, okay, or individual there. Class evidence is a little bit different. This is evidence that can be associated with a group, but never a single type of source. Okay, and so let's think about like fiber samples, clothing samples. Okay, if my clothing samples were at a particular place that ended up being a crime scene, that wouldn't necessarily link me to the crime. Okay, it might make me a suspect in it, and so. There has to be more analysis and more evidence taken into case, because all it means is that someone who wore a shirt like this was at that crime scene. Or like a paint sample off of a vehicle. Okay, say there's a hit and run and they were able to take paint samples. That would help you to figure out a class of people who had that type of vehicle, but you couldn't necessarily nail that down to exactly one vehicle. But let's say that you have a paint sample that has that's been repainted several times, and so there's 4 or 5 different layers of different kind of paint. Okay, now if that matches up with a paint sample, that makes it more probative. Okay, Okay, so you'll actually be doing a little research project, or I say research project, a small assignment on knowing the difference between individual and class evidence, and to make sure that when you come into class that you have that ready to go. And we'll talk more about evidence in our third lecture, but we'll go and we'll talk about some court cases that are really important. See you later.